Adam from LUCIDPIXUL, and welcome back. I want to start today with a bit of a funny story. Well, a bit of a funny event that could only really be driven home in light of what we've had to live through over the last few years with COVID, with being locked up, with being in this great hibernation, quote unquote, as Russell Brand put it. And it's a perfect segue into exactly what I want to talk about today. Finding direction, finding a focus as an artist, and knowing what the hell to do with yourself. With these endless options you have ahead of you, you have right in front of you, how do you buckle down and say, this is what I'm going to dedicate myself to for an undetermined amount of time? This is very often one of the most difficult decisions, and I've seen artists, and I've taught and worked with artists that were in their 40s, 50s, and 60s that were still trying to, quote, figure themselves out. So you can see that this isn't a struggle that's exclusive to 18 to 25-year-olds. You can continue to have this struggle throughout a very long career. Still find quite a bit of success, that said, but it can still be a struggle. So to start us off, since COVID is starting to lift, since we're starting to slowly, gently reintegrate into this sense of familiarity and normalcy, since a lot of us are getting our vaccines, I've had my first so far, and a lot of my neighbors are fully vaccinated and all that kind of stuff. We're slowly starting to socialize. People are starting to be closer to others. People are starting to enter other people's homes, so to speak. And when my family first moved, it was right before COVID hit. So we were only lived here for a couple of months before all of a sudden COVID hit, and we had to stay locked up. So it prevented us from being able to get out and socialize and meet people around in the neighborhood. Just a little bit, but not a lot. We had to be very careful about that kind of stuff. It's definitely affected different people in different ways. But I would say for me, where it really affected me the most, where I've been the most sensitive, is in how it affected my kids. Because I'm an adult, I've been on the planet for a really long time. I already kind of have a point of reference on what normalcy is. But when you look at 8-year-olds and 11-year-olds and 5-year-olds, even 18 or 19-year-olds, my kids range, all of these ranges from 8 to 20. It's a lot harder to watch them go through this because children are naturally far more inclined to be unapologetically social. They'll just walk up to anybody they want. They'll walk up to a group of strangers and say, hey, let's do stuff together. And seeing your kids not be able to just walk up to neighbors and kids on the street and be able to play with them is hard. And that's something that I really had a hard time with until now. Because we're starting to get vaccinated. And like clockwork, they just started to, they lifted the curfew about a week ago. Not that that was anything too detrimental to our social lives because it was 9 p.m. onwards. So for people with young kids, it's not a big deal. But they're starting to lift these restrictions. So my son, Lucas, started wandering down the street as kids would do, playing outside. He would see some kid ride by on his bicycle a couple of times and he'd go, oh, this kid must live on our street. And he would inevitably go and say hi and introduce himself to them. And in classic 8-year-old fashion, or any kid around that age, he just walked up to them and started to hang out with them. He met one kid and he was out playing, and before you knew it, there was a whole group of kids around him and they were all outside playing frisbee or ball or riding their bikes or whatever the case might be. It's fun to watch. It's fun to finally be able to watch your kids get out and make some friends on the street. It's amazingly relieving for me. And it's also funny because yesterday I was cooking dinner and the door opens. Lucas walks in the front door and says, Dad, can my friends come in? And I thought he was talking about friends I'd already met. I was like, yeah, sure. They can come in. It's no problem. And these 3 kids will come walking in. I've never seen them before in my life. These 2 little cute girls, really, really sweet, adorable girls, and their really cute older brother just come walking in the door. It's like, oh, okay. I've got a house full of people now. And they just walked in, and one of these cute little girls walks up to me, looks up at me because I'm 6'3", right? So she's looking up at me like I'm a giant, and she goes, I'm thirsty. And I went, okay, well, what do you want? I love that. I love kids just, give me something to drink. I'm thirsty. What kind of a host are you? I love it. And I went, well, what do you want? I said, I have milk, I have juice, I have water. Pick. She goes, I want milk. Fine. Sit down. I'll give you some milk. So I poured her a glass of milk. I said, say thank you. Thank you. You're welcome. She drank the milk. And then they started to draw together and have fun together. And you got to put things into perspective. She's only, well, number one, I'm a stranger. So I told her to go get her mom so that she's not walking into strangers' homes, right? So that was one thing. But the other thing is the fact that she, for starters, never questioned her decisions. She never questioned her motives. Now, that said, she was a 6-year-old, really cute little 6-year-old, right? So if she was a full-grown adult, I would have a very different reaction to some big guy with a beard and tattoos walking in going, I'm thirsty, right? I'd probably offer him a beer instead of milk. But she didn't question herself. Furthermore, Lucas didn't question whether or not it was a good or bad idea to approach them. But in their bravery and their lack of being themselves and doing what felt right for them, they were also incredibly adaptable. Like, she walked into the house and she did bark orders at me and tell me to feed her. Now, chip, chop, chip. But she also adapted herself to the rules of the home. I told her to be polite, sit down. You're not allowed to drink in the kitchen, in the living room. You have to drink in the kitchen, right? We don't want her spilling milk on the couch or the carpets. And she adapted herself to this reality. And it's Lucas's adaptability and his friends' adaptability that allowed them to integrate very quickly into this new reality, adapt to it, and make it a part of their lives. And now, and henceforth, they will be our little friends that live down the street that will most likely be walking in and out of my house whenever they feel like it. And I know that from this point forward, us as adults, myself as the father and their mom and dad, will inevitably come knocking on our door if they can't find their kids, right? We're now acquaintances, we're friends, and they had the courage to create friendships not only between themselves, but between the adults, the parents. And it's kind of neat, isn't it? How they've unlocked this new experience for me as an adult. As much as they adapted to me, you'll see that they forced me to adapt to them too. And I have absolutely no hesitations about it. I'm not upset about this new reality. I'm not upset about the fact that, oh crap, now I've got to do this from now on. No, I'm happy it happened. And I'm grateful to Lucas that he did that. Sadly, as he gets older and develops a growing sense of social insecurity, most likely that fearlessness will slowly fade away, and he'll become a little bit more choosy about the friends he picks. He'll be a little bit more hesitant about which groups he can and cannot be a part of. This usually starts to kick in around high school, right? You find your clique. Now, why is that important for what we're talking about today? Well, I honestly feel that this is, when I speak to students, I just spoke to a student of mine this morning about this. We can spend our entire lives waiting for the perfect opportunity. We can spend our entire lives in this state of suspension, not just picking a direction. And that not picking a direction, that being in this state of constantly questioning whether or not the next step we're going to take is the perfect step, and whether or not we're making the right decision, and whether or not we're committing ourselves to the right thing, can be completely debilitating to an artistic career for however long it lasts. And as soon as you learn to let go of that element, that facet of yourselves, all of a sudden opportunities start to unlock right in front of you. Potential starts to unlock. Careers start to flourish. And I think this is such a crucially important piece of information that every artist should be aware of it. In a sense, I've mentioned this in early talks. I had a talk, I can't remember what the title of it is, unfortunately, but in the talk I talk about committing to something. The whole word commitment, committing to something, and the fear of long-term commitment versus short-term commitment. The importance of committing, but the importance of removing the permanence associated with commitment. Forever and ever, destiny. I'll let you hunt that one down because I can't remember. If you remember which video that is, please link it below in the description for others. I'll pin it for you. So that already kind of talks about that topic, but I want to get more into the psychology of what makes us indecisive with our artistic choices, with our artistic styles and artistic paths. And that has everything to do with control. It has everything to do with control. I find that very often the people who are the most capable and the times in my life where I've done the most, the greatest, I've achieved the most, I've made the quickest and most substantial advances, I've had the greatest realizations about myself and about my potential, have always been in periods of my life where that control was taken away from me, where I felt like my ideals, my beliefs, my structure, my technique, my practice, my education, and everything around that was pretty much obsolete. That some element in my life made all of those things completely pointless. Kind of the equivalent of when the big ice storm hit around 1999 in Eastern Canada and knocked out the electricity for a couple of months. And we were thrown back into the Stone Age. All of these amenities, all of our chargeable items, all of our electrically powered things like stoves and fridges and hot water and lights and music were shut off. They were gone. They ceased to exist. And we lost that sense of control. And through that loss of control, we learned a sense of community. We learned a sense of innovation. We learned a sense of thriftiness. We learned how to be clever with what we had. Learned a lot. We learned a lot in this period of survival. It was a very important moment. And psychologically, when I was in moments of my life where I felt terrible things had happened to me, which you could say arguably were terrible things, but that was amplified by how it challenged my ego and my sense of self. When I felt like everything I had was taken away from me, I was forced to give up control. I was forced to concede to life and say, whatever I believed, whatever I thought, whatever ideals, whatever things I depended on are no longer there. It's just me and Mother Earth. Figure it out. As soon as I lost control, as soon as the choice was taken away from me, or at least my control over which choice was taken away from me, it's interesting how every option opened up. All of a sudden, I made myself available to everything else. By losing control, I gained direction. And that is such a perfect analogy for real life. When the Cheshire Cat asks Alice in Wonderland where she's going, and she says, it doesn't really matter. So he says, well, then it doesn't matter which way you go. You can go left or right. It doesn't matter. And the irony, the real life lesson in that is, both of those paths led to the same inevitable location. It led to the same place, to the March Hare and the Mad Hatter. Her direction, where she ends up, is of her choosing to a certain degree, but how she gets there doesn't really matter. And that is a perfect analogy for choosing an artistic path. It doesn't matter if you choose the perfect choice. It doesn't matter if you go in the right, if you choose this path or that path, if you choose this art style or that art style. It just matters that you go somewhere. Just like with Lucas, it doesn't matter if that little girl and that little girl and that little boy are the perfect friends, if they have the perfect personality chemistry with him to become best buddies for the rest of their life. It didn't matter. He just walked up to them because they were kids. He said, want to play? They said yes. They walked into my house and demanded all of my food. And that's what led to this life change that led to growth, that led to new friendships, that led to new experiences. He just picked a friend and he went with it. He didn't sit back and scrutinize it. And as such, he's got friends all up and down that street. And thanks to him, I also have friends too. So thank you, Lucas. Now, how does this relate into your artistic career? Well, this is the number one thing that I hear from students. And people are stubborn when it comes to this kind of stuff. particularly for those who have spent longer periods of time struggling with which way to go with art. Should I get into comic book art? Should I get into fantasy art? Should I get into cartooning? Should I be a little bit more realistic? Should I do Game of Thronesy type of stuff? Should I do more sci-fi Tron type of stuff? Oh my God, well, I love doing this and I love doing that and I love doing this and I love doing that. And you can keep your life caught in this loop and never pick a damn direction. Ever. And I'll say, so what you're saying is you need a sense of direction. You want to pick a path and go with it. And they say, yeah, that's what I need. That's what I want. And I say, okay, then pick this path, go that way. And 9 times out of 10, the response I'm going to get from that is, yeah, but I really like doing that too. So I put my foot down and I say, no. You're going to pick that path and stop bothering me with this path. That's the path you got to take. And they go, yeah, no, it's, yeah, but no, shit. No, I know. You're going that way. And what you realize, what becomes very clearly evident is they're looking for the perfect direction. They believe that the choice they make now is what's going to determine where they end up. And the bottom line is you're going to end up exactly where you intend on ending up. That's something that you don't have any control over. That's something that's going to happen whether you like it or not. If you want to be a professional artist, if you want to get great at art, it doesn't matter whether you go left or right. It just matters that you pick a path that allows you to grow. You pick a path that allows you to dedicate yourself to, that gives you a reason to create, that leads to growth. Where you end up it's a path that's going to forge itself inevitably. If you're trying to get to the ocean, you will find the ocean. It doesn't matter whether you cut through the woods or whether you cut through the desert. Both paths lead to the ocean. Just pick a damn direction. And trust me, you can sit at this crossroads for decades and decades and decades. I'm not speaking figuratively. I'm speaking literally. I have seen this. I've witnessed this. I've spoken to artists who have been standing at this crossroads for decades and never picked a damn path. Why is it important to just pick something and not scrutinize too much what it is? Well, for starters, just a little disclaimer here. Don't just go anywhere. But it's like, I've never done comic book art and I don't really care about comic book art, but whatever, let's give it a shot. Adam said pick it, so let's go. You could still make that work if you really dedicated yourself to it. But of course, ideally speaking, realistically speaking, pick a path you like, right? There's a reason why I picked dark fantasy, folklore inspired art. Because I like it. It speaks to me on an artistic level. It inspires me. It's the kind of stuff that I can create on a regular basis. But I didn't go picking a path that completely didn't relate to what I did. I'm not doing comic book sci-fi. If you did, you'd see it in my portfolio. That's not my main area of focus. It's dark fantasy illustration type of stuff. You know it. You're watching me do it right now. You pick a path that suits you and you go with it. I'd like you I'd like to get an image in your head of what I'm trying to talk about. Very often what we do artistically, where we get lost in this endless sea of possibilities, is we take a handful of many different types of seeds. All of those seeds of different colors and sizes and shapes all represent different possibilities. And you look at your hand and somebody asks you the question, which one is your favorite? And you look at your hand and you look at all these different color seeds and you say, well, they're all pretty in their own way. I like them all. And no, but pick your favorite. I can't really pick a favorite. They're all gorgeous. They're all really, this one, I love the colors on this one. The shape on this one's really beautiful. I like the shiny surface of that one. The texture is really nice here. I like them all. So what you do is you hold on to those seeds. And when it comes time to choosing, if you do anything, what you usually do, what I did for many years of my life, and I'm sure you're probably doing this yourself right now, unless you're working as a professional and you've already figured this one out for yourself, you close your hand, you take all of the seeds and you throw them into the water all at the same time. You don't plant them, you throw them in the water. And then you sit there and you wait for something to happen. And they all sink to the bottom. None of them grew to anything. You didn't nurture them the right way. You didn't give them the time. You didn't give them the climate they needed to grow. And on top of it, you threw too many in. Remember something, you're one human being. You're not 1,000 people, you're one. So throwing 1,000 possibilities into the water is going to amount to absolutely nothing. And even if it did, you won't live long enough to see them all come to fruition. You're not going to be able to be 25 different types of professionals. At most, maybe one, maybe two. For very few of us, if you're into that kind of thing, maybe three. But usually it's one. So what you do by taking all of these possibilities because you're afraid to prioritize any one over the other, you take them all and you throw them into the water. And none of them grow to anything. You just dabble and get a little taste of each one of them, and then every one of them are dead. Instead, you just pick one goddamn seed. It doesn't need to be the perfect one. Just pick one you think is pretty, and for today, for now, get rid of the other ones. Forget about them. They're not important. You can always come back and grab them after. You grab that one seed, you don't think about it. You just walk up to that seed and say, want to play? And the seed says, sure, why not? And you take that seed and you stick it into the ground and you cover it up with some dirt, and then you put a little water on it. You make sure it gets sun, and then you wait. And you wait. And you wait. And by waiting, I mean you just practice that one thing. You keep feeding it. Feeding it, the analogy for feeding it is practice. Practice that style. Practice that skill. Practice comic book art. Practice fantasy art. Practice whichever thing you've decided. But be very specific about it. I'm not talking about fantasy art in general. I'm talking about this specific facet of fantasy. Maybe it's medieval Game of Thronesy type of stuff. Maybe it's more traditional fantasy RPG Tolkien art. Maybe it's dark fantasy Dark Souls art. Pick a specific seed. Plant it in the ground. Get to know it. Identify with that seed. Nurture it. Practice it. And then one day, a little leaf will pop out of the ground. And you go, look what I just made. And I guarantee you, even if you've been at this for the last 30, 40 years, that's the first time you ever saw something come from what you've planted. Isn't it? It's the first time you've ever looked and said, holy shit, look, I just created life. And that in and of itself is going to be all the validation you need to realize you made the right decision. And here's the cool thing. You realize at that point as well, as you continue to nurture it, as it continues to grow, you continue to feel more and more enthusiastic, inspired, motivated. You start to put more of, quote, yourself into what you do. And as you put more and more of you into your artwork becomes more of you. And then you realize that it didn't matter if you chose dark fantasy, it didn't matter if you chose cartooning or comic book art, it didn't matter if what you painted was macabre or funny or cute or sad, because every single path led to the Mad Hatter and the March Hare. Both paths converged to the same thing, and that same thing is you. You will turn anything you do into you eventually. All you need is a conduit. All you need is a catalyst. Something you can adhere to, and you need to give it time to grow and become something of value. I guarantee you, if you ask any artist out there, ask Bobby Chiu, ask Ahmed Al-Duri, ask Tyler Edlin, ask me. I am advocating for it, so obviously I'm going to validate my own point, right? But ask any of these artists, and guaranteed, they didn't necessarily choose to paint exactly that which they paint now at the beginning. If you look at Anthony Jones, what you see Anthony Jones do right now is very, very specific. But guaranteed, if you look at the path, the artistic growth path that took him to where he is, he didn't paint that every single day. He probably started off doing very different stuff. You wouldn't even recognize him 20 years ago. You wouldn't even recognize Anthony Jones 20 years ago. You wouldn't recognize me 20 years ago. But looking back at my animation background, looking back at the cartoons, the quirky stuff that I did, the light-hearted fantasy stuff, the dark-hearted fantasy stuff, the more comic humor narrative type of stuff that I did, looking at what I'm painting right now, I can see how what I'm painting right in front of me right now is a manifestation of every other little thing that I learned along the path of growth. And it led me to who I am today, to the artist I am today. And I can honestly look at what I paint today and feel me in it. It feels like me today. But for so many years of my life, I kept trying to become, I kept trying to control and say, this is my identity. This is where I belong. This is how I identify myself. This is the name I give myself as an artist. This is me. And I held on to that until one day, somebody pulled the rug out from under me. I lost everything. I ended up with nothing. I was broke, I was unemployed, I was a bum, and I had zero self-esteem. I felt like a complete washout. I felt like I had wasted my life on the wrong dream. And I did the best thing at that very point that defined the rest of my life. Like Jim Carrey said, you can spend your entire life failing at what you don't like, so you might as well give a shot at what you do. So my advice to you today is this. If you've been standing at a crossroads for the last year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, or maybe 30 or 40 years, and you still can't find yourself capable of picking the right path, of choosing the rest of your life, realize, number one, it doesn't matter when you start. Growth is as enjoyable in your 60s as it is when you're in your 20s. Okay? So I want you to ignore the clock. I want you to ignore that number that you associate with your identity. It doesn't matter. You can find great success in your 70s and 80s. That doesn't matter. And the second thing is, let go of the possibilities. Give up control over finding that perfect seed. Just grab one, plant it, nurture it, and you will see that no matter which seed you planted, it's always going to blossom into the most beautiful plant. It'll blossom into you, inevitably. All right? So with that said, thank you for joining me once again. I love you all with all my heart, and happy painting. Take care.